Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're on page 1355, Aleph Shinun Hey. And after yesterday's introduction, which I'm not going to sum up the whole thing, but briefly, understanding the relationship between moon and sun, which is essentially the relationship between Zah and Malchus. And I should qualify, remember that in Makabel and Malchus itself, we learned there's three different types of Levana, the moon. There's the of an Even Tov, of a bright stone, and the of Riyah, of the eyes. So Malchus is referred to, therefore, sometimes as the moon, sometimes as a stone, sometimes as eyes, which we're going to discuss later. But right now, to really understand Zohar Malchus, I spoke about in the context of sun and moon, the seven aliyahs, seven elevations of Malchus, after not only its diminishment as a result of sins and transgressions, but also the very fact that Malchus is the lowest of the spheres and therefore is a more diminished energy, less lamer gamal klum, does not have light of its own. That light is coming from Zoh, from the mashpia, the sun. And we spoke about how Malchus elevates. Ultimately, it stands face to face with the sun in level 6, with like a full moon, but it's still receiving from the sun. Then in level 7, which will happen when Mashiach comes, then they stand not just side by side, but they're both receiving from the source of Keser, one Keser to both of them, which is Tiferes Imma, as we shall read shortly, the Keser, the mother, the Moichin, that feeds both Zah and Malchus, both Shemesh and Levana. The difference is that the beginning of creation, you also had that situation, but then it went B'derech Maiver, it traveled through Zah. Even when they were of equal stature, meaning both receiving from Tiferes Imma, it still went through and passed through Zah. So some effect there was, as the Alter Rebbe says in the Geras HaKedesh. That's how the Rebbe Rashab reconciles it. Whereas when Mashiach comes and the Eitz Chaim says Lo Hoya Me'elam, that status never happened, meaning even before the diminishment in the beginning of creation, because it's not even Derech Maiver, it's straight. Malchus getting a straight link to the same place where Zah is getting a link to. And all this is not the final level that we spoke about, where Malchus itself reaches the Hela Ma'atzmi that's higher than all Giloyim altogether, as he discussed back on page 1208 and 1209. So now with that introduction, we'll be able to understand what he's going to say here, which is relevant, obviously, to the discussion, because he's talking about the Dugma Mekol Zeh, the three different types of Makabel I just mentioned, moon, bright stone, and eyesight, in contrast to the moon, to the sun. So now he's going back and said, after we learned that Dugma Mekol Zeh. So I'm going to read now from 1355 inside. I'm going to begin with the parentheses. So first he stated, I'll just sum up what we learned. Dugma Mekol Zeh, Zah Malchus. Zah is bechinas mashpia be'etzem. That's how it's structured. And say this also, Zah's role is a mashpia. Be'etzem Husay, and Malchus Be'etzem Husay is bechinas Makabel. Just to drive it home a bit, I remember giving more than once, but a workshop to couples, secular couples, and I explained this idea, Mashpia Makabel. But it had to be explained well, because the first initial reaction people have is, okay, fine, so it confirms all the stereotypes that the husband is the giver and the woman is the recipient. So I had to explain, number one, the recipient does not mean passive. It's not like one is the giver, the other one's just sitting around and waiting to be given a gift, to be given charity. That's number one. Number two, remember, in the healthy relationship, like it is in the high levels of, let's say, Zah and Malchus of Atzilus, there's bittul. Zah is a mashpia, not because it has an ego, or because it feels superior. That's its role. It's just like the sun and the moon. Take away the egos, there's two different roles. When you have bittul, which is a sense of humility and modesty and recognize it's not about me. So even though one can be a teacher and the other a student, the teacher does not feel greater than the student. That's his role. Some people have this role, some people have that role. So in a real partnership, It's to start defining it by what you do. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're doing it because that's what God commanded you to do, so it's two servants who are serving a higher cause. And if that higher cause demands hashpah, fine. If the higher cause demands to be makabel, so be it. So in other words, it's within the structure of existence that you have this idea, just like it is in any good business or any good cooperative effort. Some people have this strength, and that's when they're a giver. Another person has a different strength, and that's where they are a giver. So everybody's giving and taking and receiving and giving and receiving all the time. So you don't think of it in terms of one is better or greater than the other. I remember it was very well received, because if you don't predicate it by that principle of bittul, it sounds very much, oh, the mashpia sounds like the greater one. We still have to understand what the moon was bothered by, that it made the kitrug, that it complained. But as I said, that's out of the scope of what he's discussing here. So bottom line is, one is be'etzem husam mashpia, one is mekabel. Techenu gam lifnei amiyut. This is not due to any diminishment or any complaint or any aberration. This is the way creation happened. I'm reading from the beginning already. Might as well read it inside. When the moon and the sun and the moon were both two great luminaries, that was the case. But the sun was mashpi, the moon was makabel. They were both equal stature and equal power. But bottom line is, through that Malchus was receiving through Zah, like he says, V'hainu, shegilui ha'odah b'Zah. The Gilui was in Zah. That's the way God made it, that it should be in Zah. Zah stores Gilui. Just like the role of Oyer is to reveal, is to be aware, is consciousness. The role of a Keli is to receive, is to create the substance, to create the structure. So the same thing is Zah is the Oyer, or Malchus, and Malchus receives the light through Zah. So what does it mean they were both great luminaries? Because the light that Malchus received from Zah was exactly as it was in Zah. There was no diminishment. It traveled through it, just like in a funnel where wine, the same wine, travels from one place to another through a pipe, or through a channel, or through a conduit. So it says, that's what it says. Like it says elsewhere, now we understand. This is the beginning of creation. Keser echad l'shneim, one crown for both kings. And that's what the Rebbe Rashab adds. So in other words, there's one Keser for both. So they both have the equal source, equal power. However, the way it reaches into Malchus is through Merech Ma'ivir, passing through Zah. And that's what distinguishes from what will be La'asad Lavi, as we'll soon read inside the parentheses. And you'll see how now comes everything I explained yesterday, and how Malchus works, that through Avodah, we ultimately elevate Malchus on all levels. Where Malchus goes and becomes even greater than it won't even be Derech Ma'ivir of Zah. But we'll read that now inside the parentheses. Okay, so that is the statement he makes, and now he's going to explain this further. Any questions? Let's start with that. So now you'll see there's a little dense, but after everything we've learned and discussed, I think it'll be a lot clearer now what the Rebbe Rashab is going to say, because he's writing it very briefly. Connections all good, by the way? Just making sure.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
What was wrong yesterday? What? We had it fixed?
They had to change the wires. The wires were old outside. It was worn down. Hopefully this solved it. Okay. The connection between the Lavan and the Shemesh had to be repaired a bit. So now he says like this: "Ba'ayim masher kosov b'sidr b'sharish chedesh." So the Rebbe Rashab is obviously writing for advanced as students. So he's assuming we know things already, and I will fill in anything that's not clear. But he's saying, so the Siddur is always the Mittler Rebbe composed and published a Siddur in his lifetime, which collects all the Maimorim, many of them that he himself wrote, but mostly from the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim in the order of the Siddur. I mentioned it a number of times. It's called Siddur Imdach. So when he says Siddur, that's what he means. B'shar Rosh Chodesh. So there's a section there on the tefillas and the prayers of Rosh Chodesh, which of course talks about Levana and sun. So he says there, Sham Malchus mekabelas mechach mishalei adeza. So he introduces an idea that Malchus receives straight from Chochma, not through Zoh. And he's not talking necessarily in the future. He says it as a statement that there's that type of level. So how is it consistent with what we just said? We said even in the beginning of creation, before the diminishment, it's still received through Zoh, but passing through here, it says, Lo ya'edei Zoh. So the Rebbe Rashab says, V'tzarech leimer, you have to say that the pshat, the meaning in the Siddur, shezo gam ken ayedei maiver hazoh. Then when the Alter Rebbe says, the Siddur it says, not through Zoh, he means not bislapshus, that Zoh doesn't alter or change the flow, it's only passing through. Maivid hazoh. And the Rebbe Rashab makes a case for it. Like it says elsewhere, that the ashpah of speech, which is the level of Malchus, I'll explain that in a moment. So even though you're speaking an idea that's coming from the mind, it has to travel through the midas, the emotions. So let me just elaborate a bit. So Dvar Melech Shalten, we say the king's power is in his words, his commands. Because Malchus, one of the features of Malchus is one of the ways to describe Malchus is Dibur. Dvar Hashem, Dibur. Like we say, Asar Maimoris, Nivra Elam, God spoke. So this is Dibur. Why? Because Dibur is like Malchus. It's a interface, a connector between the speaker and the listeners. So how does the Melech tell his subjects and his ministers and his servants and his people what to do? Through his speech, through his order. So Dibur is Malchus. Now, Dibur can be an emotional speech. You can talk emotionally. You could speak about love. You could speak emotionally about personal feelings based on, but Dibur could also be intellect. You could be speaking completely a concept, an idea that's coming from the mind. So the question is this: if Zoh and Malchus are two different tracks, the Dibur can be directly linked to your brain, and it's not going through emotions. Think of a dispassionate or an unemotional speaker. We're not getting into whether it's the best speech because it's not words from the heart that enter the heart. But technically speaking, you don't need to travel through Zoh necessarily, through Midas, to communicate an idea from your mind. There are a lot of people who speak straight from their brain without Midas. Yet it says, Mokemachet, I have to look up where, that even then it still goes through the Midas, b'derech maiver. Why? Because the Midas is the relationship. Remember, Moichin and Midas are distinguished, not just one is cognitive and one is emotional. Mind does not need another person for you to conceive ideas and think of ideas. You don't need another person. On the contrary, actually, if you're studying something or reading or immersed in study, another person comes over, it's a distraction. I'm not talking about a chavrusa now, learning with someone else. But generally speaking, a mind is really a solitary experience. Chassidus explains because it's the divine, and it's above existence. It's God maybe conceiving the idea of building existence. But those of us that said the Bar Mitzvah Maimer, he talks about it. He says the Moichin is somewhat what you say, is talk about rice. Oh no.
Yeah.
Did it get choppy?
It did get choppy.
Yeah, I thought it was just my end.
I'm hoping that they solved it, but let's see. Okay, let's hope for the best. Okay, now we're good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good. Okay. So he explains there that when the Eibush like Istaka Baraisa Bor Alma, it says Alpayim Shana Kodma Torah La'ela. The Torah precedes the world by 2,000 years. What's 2,000? There's no time. So Alef Chochma, Alef Chabina, because the Torah is talking about God's mind, which is removed, is above existence. It's like the blueprint. Then Elam Chesed Yibana, you need now a relationship. Relationships require emotions. So emotions are also about a connection. So essentially, if you're speaking to someone, by definition, even if it's an intellectual conversation, the mere fact that you're speaking to someone is already somewhat of a relationship. So therefore, even when it's coming from Chochma, it doesn't completely bypass midas. It travels through midas. The question is how much midas have impact on it. If it's also infused with emotional passion, like words from the heart enter the heart, person speaking very impassioned and very emotional and so on, then the midas are actually impacting whatever is being expressed. But even not, what he's saying is that when he says in the Siddur that it comes straight from Chochma, it's not exclusively, it means it's bederech maiver through Zah, through midas. Okay. So we don't have a question now, because the fact is, Malchus does receive sometimes straight from Chochma, but it's also through passing through midas Zah. So now, that's what he says here. However, he says it doesn't actually fully answer the question. Why? Because when you look there in the Siddur, inside, he says, Ach, lefi ma shekosu shom hamoshel. He brings an example there of what does it mean, a speech that comes straight from the mind and not through midas, not through zah. It says, Kamaya dibur haba b'derech mamela metir desasechel. This, everything, which means we're talking about a speech that's coming automatically, inadvertently, like just blurting out words, due to a person who's very engrossed and very, tir desasechel means trouble, but it's not really trouble. It means he's very the pressure of his mind as he's learning, he blurts out words. So if we were talking about a premeditated, planned talk, then it's a relationship. If I'm coming to speak with you, even if I don't express emotions, but the mere fact I'm speaking with you is some relationship. But he says there, a mashal, that we're talking about a dibur, that's not coming because I want to speak with you. It's I'm busy learning, as I'm so preoccupied, tirda, so preoccupied and so immersed in the learning, automatically words come out. You know, sometimes you're reading something and you just say something. It could be an expression. It can be expressing what you're learning. So it's, you see from there, he says, that it's betir zechel. So therefore, there's not necessarily through midas. V'chein hu, he says, and just like it is in the Siddur, there's another place where he brings this example, or at least this concept. He also says this idea. So then we see that it's not b'derech maiver, not even maiver of Zah. It's straight from Chochma to Malchus, to Dibur. Yesh leimer. So this, Yitaka could say, Shezeu gam shalei adei maiver hazah. That this indeed is an example that Malchus is receiving straight from Chochma that's not passing through Zah. Now, of course, this does not mean that it's like La'osid Love, where the moon and the sun will be of the same equal place. He's just pointing out that we have an example for this. Also today, that you could have example of Malchus receiving directly from Chochma. He's soon going to get back to this. So far, the qualification was really just to explain that being in the name of thoroughness, the complete picture, there is a scenario, in this case, with through tir desasechel, when a person is very preoccupied in the mind, they could just blurt out words that are not coming through midas, through zah. So it's straight Chochma to Malchus. What that means in practical terms, I have to look up in those Maimorim to see how he applies that. But that there's such a scenario, fine. So it doesn't change anything what we've learned, because this obviously is not part of the regular process. This is a unique situation. He's going to come back to this, I believe, at the end of the parentheses. So that's the first thing he says. Any questions about this before I read on? Okay. Yesh Leimer, the Rebbe Rashab's continue. This is a long parenthesis that goes for another quite a few lines, another 10 lines or something like that. He says, V'yesh Leimer, you can say, the Mashakoseh be'etz Chaim, what it says in Eitz Chaim, be'inyan, Keser echad, that there's one crown for both, Zoh and Malchus, sun and moon, Tiferes Imma, hoyegam b'bchinas Keser lenukva. So now here's for the first time he mentions Keser Tiferes Imma, which means Tiferes of Bina. I'm sure some of you right away thinking, didn't we just say there's a connection to Chochma? How it's only Bina? I'll address that shortly. I already addressed it a few days ago, but hold that question if you have that question. So he's saying like this, that what it says in Eitz Chaim, so in Eitz Chaim it says there's a state, we're talking about the 7th level, there's one Keser, one crown, not two crowns. And Zoh, the crown of Zoh is higher than the crown of Malchus, because that's the 6th level. That's a full moon, but it's still, but the 7th level is one Keser, Tiferes Imma, which is also a Keser for Nukva, for Malchus. She says, Gam Kena Kavona Canal. Yashlemer, that the Kavona is also, the Kavona there is also Gam Kena Kavona Hanal. Now, what does he mean by Hakavona Hanal? So here, you could say he means, like it says in the Siddur and L'Kutei Torah, just like he said, Malchus bypasses Zoh. So you could say when it says in Eitz Chaim that will be one Keser for both, that it bypasses the Midas Zoh in the 7th level, and it's receiving straight from Tiferes of Imma. That's what it seems like he means. I'll read on because I'm not 100% positive, but it sounds like that. Gam kena kavon hanal. That's the Yesh Leimer. The Chenu Mefurish, and it's actually stated explicitly, Beitz Chaim Shar Mir B'Mir Hayerech Perek Aleph. That in Perek Aleph, in the first chapter of this Eitz Chaim that we've been addressing, the 7 levels, he says it explicitly, that it will go straight from Zoh. To use the language, I think he quoted it earlier. Let me just look inside. Yeah. I'm just looking at the language of the Eitz Chaim. 1 second. I think he says. Yeah, this is the language. Umakabelas ereseha, the 7th level, that Malchus will receive its light and its energy, me'ima atzma, from Imma, Bina itself, shaloya yedei Zoh. Not through Zoh. And there he says, Dimyan, Abba ve'ima v'tiyah shleim b'chol yutzvidah. Zatachas hagilul shalom. Okay. So, here Maz will explain the Chochma Bina aspect. Remember that the Midas are born like children, offspring, from a father and a mother, Chochma and Bina. Chochma is the spark, the seed that the father provides, and Bina is the mother, the womb, who carries the child. So when a person is contemplating ungodliness, they need Chochma and Bina to give birth to Midas. He says it very clearly in Tanya, chapter 3. The whole beginning of Tanya, chapter 3 is about that. Chochma is the spark, the conception of the idea. Bina develops it. So then you have the full-blown Midas that are born from that. So when you speak about the birth of Midas, or in this context also Malchus, so generally Malchus is receiving through the Midas, as we know. But at this highest level, the fact is Malchus is receiving both from Chochma and Bina It's just a question of whether you're emphasizing the father dimension, the nakuda, the spark, the seed, or you're focusing on the mother dimension, which is really the development of the idea. So it's not really a contradiction. He's just mentioning two different levels. It's Chochma and Bina. In Siddur, he's focusing on the Chochma part, and in Eitz Chaim, he focuses on the Tiferes of Imma, the Bina part. But regardless, in the context of what we're discussing, the question is whether it's bypassing the Midas or not. And here, clearly, from the Eitz Chaim, it appears that it's bypassing. So now, why did he bring the Siddur? Because he's giving an example that it's not derech, it's going straight to Chochma or Bina. However, this is not completely accurate. He's going to explain now. Ach nida be'etz chaim, the Rebbe Rashab continues. However, when you look in Eitz Chaim, it appears, Eitz Chaim Sham, Perek Beis, in chapter 2, the Kedem HaKitrug, before the Kitrug, which means before the diminishment of the moon, before the moon complained, Hoysa Shava became Moshe. The moon was equal in stature with the sun. Rak b'bchinas acher ba'acher, in a state of acher ba'acher, like we spoke back to back. V'hoysa kisrei l'mayla mikisra. And the keser of the shemesh of Zah was higher than the keser mikisra of Malchus. V'hainu shekibla eiris ayidei Zah. That means that Malchus received its energy, the moon received through Zah. So even though it's true they were equal, it sounds to me like he's talking like the sixth level, actually, where the moon is full, so it has it's connecting with the sun. He does say acher ba'acher, not face to face, which is interesting. Not sure why, but I thought he does say that. But still, that doesn't mean the moon is equally receiving from the same source. The Keser of Zah is higher than the Keser of Malchus because it's going through Zah. V'ayin sham b'pirish Yofashah. Yofashah is a commentary on Eitz Chaim. Says, look there. So what's the meaning of Keser echad l'shneim then? Ma'u inyan Keser echad l'shneim. If you say one crown for both, and then you say the crown of Zah is higher than the crown of Malchus, what does it mean? If I recall correctly, he says there because it passes through Zah. Ultimately, the Keser that goes to Malchus is still going through Zah. But regardless, he says clearly that it's not bypassing Zah. So what does it mean that we said here that Malchus gets straight from Zah, straight from Bina? So he says, Yesh Lemer, we can say, I'm sorry, Umasher Kosov, the Keser echad l'shneim, she'tekabel mitiferes the Imma shaloya yedei Zah. And what he said that we just learned, at a next level, it's receiving from Tiferes and Imma not through Zah. Yesh Lemer, we can say, shezehu nasa al yidei Avodah dafke. That's the difference. The way it is on its own, the way by creation, the sun and the moon, ultimately, the moon always is makabel from the sun. Even when they were both the same stature, like Shnei Me'eres Agdelim, like he said before the parentheses, it was still created as mashpia makabel. And therefore, even though the moon is getting the energy, and it's on the same level like the sun, but it's still coming through the sun. But Avodah changes things. When we work, and that's why I explained yesterday, the Avodah of elevating Malchus. When we do Avodah, we add a new ingredient into the equation. We're feeding Malchus and we're elevating it. He says through Avodah, it can bypass Zah and go all the way up to Bina, to Tiferes Imma, and obviously also to Chochma. And that's why the Eitz Chaim says on level 7, the Bechina Zu Lo Hoyer Le'elam Adayim. This never happened yet. Because we spoke earlier What existed in the beginning of creation? What existed was that Shemesh and Levana, equal stature before the kitrug, before the diminishment. However, it's receiving through Zoh, Derech Maiver at least. The state where you're talking about it's receiving straight from Bina, that comes through Avodah, and that's why it didn't exist yet, because we didn't have Avodah. In the beginning of creation, there was no Avodah. All you had was the sun and moon were created, Mashpia Makabel, and the human being didn't exist yet. But after the years of our work and our Avodah, that's what changes it. And that's what it means, Lo Hoya Ma'olam. Lo Hoya La'olam Adayim. And now he's going back to what it says in the Siddur, that when we said that Malchus received straight from Chochma, and the same thing regarding the Siddur we quoted in the beginning of the parentheses. The Sharish Chedesh, that says that what? That Dibur gets straight from Chochma, because like inadvertent speech, you have to say that too is coming through Avodah. So without Avodah, Malchus will always need Zoh, whether it's passing through, but it always will need Zoh, whether it's passing through or more than that, to receive. But through Avodah, this is the additional component. We can reach the level where Malchus can cross, can bypass Zoh and go all the way up to Bina and Chochma. Now the Rebbe Rashab qualifies. If that's the case, Avodah is also now. So what will happen to Asad Lavi that we don't have now? So he says, even with Avodah, and what he says in the Siddur, that Malchus, like the inadvertent speech that comes from Chochma, it's a taste of what will be in the future. But the bottom line, the future obviously is going to be a higher level. So as much as Malchus receives now straight from Chochma Bina, it's still Bavadai. Certainly, it's not like it'll be the future. Bigmara Birurim, when there'll be the end of Avodah and the Birurim will be completely finished and Malchus will be elevated to its proper place, that's completely going to be on a higher level. Ukiyadua. So then why are we saying there's a taste of it? So it says, Ukiyadua, Shabachom Madrege Yesh Kama Madreges. As it's known, every level encompasses many levels. So when you're talking about the Aliyah of Malchus that bypasses Zoh, that itself has many levels. There's the level as it is today through Avodah, and there's the level as it will be L'Asad Lavi when Avodah Berurim will be finished, and then Malchus will have his direct link, the moon, straight to the source, not through the sun and Zoh. But this is through Avodah. Avamasha betchila, betchila sa'atzilus. Now he's going back to the way it was in the beginning of creation. But the fact that in the beginning of the emanation, when Zoh and Malchus first emanated, or in the terms of the moon and the sun and the moon, when they were first created, before anything happened, there were two great luminaries. Then the moon, even though it was a great luminary, wasn't diminished yet, it still receives its air by passing through Zoh. That existed already in the beginning of creation. And now he brings the Ageres HaKedesh that he brought back on page 1209 on top. The Maivid who gam came bechinis slapshus. Now, Maivid is not just passing through completely, it does have some element that impacts the oil. So there you have it. There you have it, that what? Then the beginning of creation, before Avodah, Malchus and Zoh were equal stature, but still, Malchus was still receiving it by passing through Zoh. And L'Asad Lavi that will come after Avodah, we're receiving directly without even passing through, because passing through still has some impact. So you see now, without all the introductions I gave, how this parentheses would be very difficult to digest exactly. Even as it is, you have to break it down. So I think now it's a lot clearer, and I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
It says Shnei Ma'oros Agdolos.
The
So
sun and
that
the moon.
both, right. But I thought we were saying the sun received not, I don't know, directly, but not by
The
way
sun or the
of
moon.
Derech Maiver.
Sun or the moon.
The sun. I thought we said the sun didn't receive
The
through
sun is
Zah.
Zah. What
Right.
about it?
So how
We're
could,
talking about Malchus. Malchus can receive usually in the beginning of creation and without Avodah, even when it's a full luminary like the sun, it's still receiving it through passing through Zah and through Avodah.
did you say the sun? Did you say the sun is Zah?
Sun, of course, is Zah and Malchus is the moon. Yeah.
Right. So how can it say the Shnei Ma'oros Agdolos, the two great spheres? One of them is a sun. So let's just read it as the sun was receiving the light through Maiver of Zah. How can Zah receive
no.
or
You're
Maiver
not reading
Zah?
it correctly. He means the moon is receiving it through Zah, not the sun.
Why does it say Shnei Ma'oros Agdolos?
Because the beginning of creation, there were two entities. They were both luminaries, and the moon was receiving through
Okay.
Maiver.
All right. I got it. Okay. Got it. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
I assume,
Any questions?
hi, Rabbi. How are you? Eliezer Gold. It seems like I assume that the Rebbe is going to explain the Mila of having a direct line from Malchus to Tiferes Imma in Lasi Lavo. He's going to discuss that. What's the advantage of that? What we're going to get from that? Is that correct? And one more question.
We already discussed it at length. I can sum it up. Will he go back to it? He may. He's already explained it, and I can sum it up. And he'll probably go back to it again.
Do you mind summing it up for a minute? Because that's the punchline here, that we're going to eventually be able to have a direct line.
Well, it's like the student and the teacher. We say in the beginning, the student is dependent on the teacher. And then it says at 40 years, he's able to understand the depth of the teacher, and he's able to even reach levels that are beyond the teacher. It's simply the process of Avodah through all the thousands of years of work have taken a yesh that always was dependent. It's like saying the body is fed by the soul all these thousands of years, and la'asad the soul will be fed by the body, because the body will become refined enough and be able to draw down new higher levels of energy. So essentially, it's like the makabel will have a quality that first it had to receive from the mashpia, then it's able to go to a place that's even higher than mashpia. It's like we learned the example he's going to teach, and we learned as well. In the beginning, who's the chassan, who's the kala? The Torah is the chassan, and the Jews are the kala. We need to learn Torah to know what God wants of us. But as we grow and elevate, what happens? We're able to mashpia in the Torah. I don't know if you recall, but we learned earlier the biti achesi imi. So biti is when we're listening to the Torah and following its guidelines. Achesi is like the Sarei, is like the Tanoim and Amoraim, who are able to develop and legislate Torah through their knowledge, a psak halacha, halacha, and so on. And imi is when the Jews and the neshamas Yisrael mashpia in Torah. So that's essentially with the three levels. Malchus first is receiving, then Malchus becomes like an equal, and then Malchus becomes like a mashpia. So in simple terms, when you teach someone Torah, in the beginning they're the recipient, you're the teacher. The goal is that they should firstly come equal to you, and then they should actually be mashpia to you things that they learned or they know that you didn't even know. That would be Malchus going to a place that's even higher than the mashpia. In simple Baal-Batisha terms.
But here it's saying that we're going to makabel, not be mashpia. We're going to makabel straight from Tiferes Imma. We're going to makabel,
meaning not from the teacher, but from where the teacher got his wisdom, from the source of wisdom. Yeah.
So we're going to receive that, and then it's going to be or choser, meaning that mashpia is another level that we're not only going to receive.
So let's not talk about being mashpia to Zah. but it will reach a place that it does not need the teacher any longer. It can go to the place straight to the well from where the teacher received. You couldn't do that in the beginning. That needs Avodah. That's the work of studying, and then you're able to. It's like just like your teacher taught you Ayin Beis, and then you come to a point where you can go back to the regular source, and you don't need the teacher to show you how to learn the Gemara or the Chassidus.
The Zah here though is Midos, and so I was wondering
The
that
Mashpia. The Zah is the Mashpia, the Shemesh, the teacher. Malchus is the student in the example I gave. And Bina is the source of where the teacher gets his intelligence from. The Torah, let's call it the Torah, let's say.
right.
So beginning, the student needs the teacher, and then you go even higher to Moich. In the context of
Midas.
Midas and Moichin, I explained before that when you look at a piece of art, first you come to understand the artist, but then you come to understand what shapes the artist, how he is on his own. The Moichin of the artist is deeper than the Midas of the artist, because the Moichin is what's going on within himself that he didn't necessarily convey in his actual art, but you can come to that after you travel upward. The deeper intention, so to speak. So when you say Midas, we learn Moichin that connect to Midas is more the Moichin as it's utilitarian and relates to us. Then you reach to the Moichin as they are on their own. That's reaching a level of the divine, or a level of that's even beyond the relationship with us. You're getting into the so-called core mind of godliness, of Moichin. We learned this earlier. Moichin Shaykh Lamidus is a Moichin that's already like unique. Hebrew unique Moichin. We learned Mutva Murgish Muskel. So there's a Seichel that relates to Midas, which means a Seichel that already relates to the other. And then there's a Seichel as it is on its pure on its own, if you want to use that language.
So would that be connected to the level of reaching Kini Kinezi Kamoni just straight to that at the time of Lassi Lavo, we'll be able to have a connection to that pure intellectual side of
you could connect it to that, yeah. That today we reach the 7 nations, the 7 midas, and then we'll be able to reach the Meichin. Yeah, you could connect it to that.
And one more connection. What about Shemesh being the Umas Olam and Malchus being connected to the Am Yisrael? So is there a discussion here that relates those two aspects?
Here, I wouldn't bring it in here. Here, it's just confuse matters. Because here he's talking about the Shemesh not as it relates to nations of the world. He's talking about Shemesh here as it relates to Zah of Atzilus. So here, I wouldn't bring it here. That's a different discussion.
Okay, thank you.
The idea that Malchus compares to the Neshamas, yes. But the comparison to the nations is not, it's a different context.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Beautiful. Amazing.
Great. Any other questions? Okay. So we finished the parentheses. Should I read a few more lines? Let's see here. Okay, I'll read a few more lines. Oi, another way of explaining how Zah and Malchus work with each other, which means that the energy within Malchus is coming through Zah, passing through. Says another way to explain it is by saying Shezeu al derech shiluf havaya ba'adnai. Shu gilu shem havaya mamish rak shenimshach al shem adnai. Okay. I don't know if you remember, but back in volume 2, closer to the end, he spoke about shiluf havaya ba'adnai and adnai ba'havaya. So let's first explain what that means. So a few words. Today we don't pronounce the name Havaya the way it was pronounced, because the Shema Meferish. As a matter of fact, we don't even know how to pronounce it. But even if you read the actual letters, nobody ever reads it the way it sounds. You know, we say Havaya, but if you read Yud and then a Hey and then a Vav and a Hey, how do you read it? You never hear anyone say that expression, even when they're davening or saying a bracha. You say Baruch Atah. What do you say? Adnai. Now I'm saying Adnai because I don't want to say the way we actually say it, because that's Adnai you're allowed to say. It's a little different. Vowel, I'm using the vowels differently. But we say Baruch Atah, as we know the next word, we don't read it Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's like a Klotz Kasha. Every child asked that question. He said, when you read it, Yud Hey Vav Hey reads a certain way. And we never say it that way. So the Gemara tells us, because today, Kishem Shani Nichtav, Kishem Shani Nikra, Ani Lo Nichtav. The way it's written is not the way it's pronounced. La Asad Lave, when it says Vayhoye Bayemahu, Yi Hashem Echad, Shmai Echad. So we will read it the way it's written. So this explains, what does that mean? That we cannot express in our Giluyim the intensity and the power of Havaya as it is in its full focus. So we pronounce it Adnai. So in other words, it's actual Havaya, but it's Havaya as it's coming through. Shiluv means interwoven through the letters of Adnai. So the Aleph, Daled, and the Nun and the Yud are essentially the way we pronounce the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. Now there's two ways this can work. It could be Shiluv Havaya ba'Adnai. It could be Shiluv Adnai ba'Havaya. Kabbalah explains that's Mamayl Lamata, Mamat Lamayl. So basically, Havaya is the divine energy as it is in its full glory. Adnai, it's somewhat being filtered and being channeled into something that in our world today we can receive. Little like a tzimtzum, although sometimes it's compared to Havaya and Elikim. As a matter of fact, in volume 2, he said, Adnai Elikim, Elikim is how Malchus is in Atzilus, and I believe Adnai is how Malchus is in Biyah, or the other way around. I'm not sure which way, I have to look it up. I can look it up. But bottom line is, similar, Havaya Elikim, Shemesh Hashem, Ki Shemesh Havayu, Ki Shemesh Shemogan Havaya Elikim, the sun and its sheath and its shield is Havaya and Elikim. So Havaya is the Gili, Elikim is the Keli. Like we learned, Havayahu Elikim is like the Keli, the Tzimtzum, the concealment. So similar. So Shiluv Havaya ba'Adnai, he's saying that you could say that Havaya would be the sun, Adnai would be the moon, or you could say Havaya is Zah, and Adnai is Malchus. So we're saying that the Gilead Hayabazah Malchus and Malchus received straight from the sun, but it's not in a diminished state. It's still coming from Havaya, but it's coming through Havaya. That's what he says here, that's this level. It's mamish like the light of the sun. Actually, I should correct myself. I first thought Havaya and Adnai is the sun and the moon. Now I'm thinking maybe he means Havaya is like Imma, and it's coming from there straight into Adnai, into Malchus, exactly as it is in the sun. I'm not positive about that. I have to read this again. Let me just see, how does he say it before the parentheses? He said, that the Amshochem in Malchus will just pass through Zah, and he says, Oy shezeh derech shiluv havaya ba'Adnai. Gili shem havaya mamish nakshim chadei shem Adnai. I correct myself. I think when I read it again now, it sounds very much like Havaya would be the Keser. So it's Mamish Havaya, but it's going through Adnai. So then in this case, Adnai would be like Zah, passing through Zah. I'm not positive because I've not recall seeing that Havaya and Adnai is like Bina and Zah, or Keser and Zah. Usually Adnai is Malchus and Havaya is Zah, Shemesh. So I'm a little confused, to be very honest. I'm not sure. Ubchinas Momat Lamaylu in Shiluv Adnai ba'Havaya, v'Ayin Ad Shem Adnai Misam Kam Kun Shem Havaya. Ava b'chol zo shezahu mashpia Malchus ubchinas mekabel. I stick with my first interpretation. That is the sun. So the moon, Malchus is receiving Zah. So it's exactly Zah, but it's traveling through Malchus. That's what it sounds like to me if I really read it, because that's consistent with how it's usually interpreted. The problem is the Rebbe Rashab is saying it's so short, he doesn't really spell it out. Because afterwards he says, but the bottom line is, maybe it'll become clearer when we read on. But you know what? Let's stop here. I'll look through it again, try to figure it out. Hey, it's part of the learning process. You don't always get it the first time, so part of the process. Not sure, positive. Yeah. Okay. So let's reserve that for the next year.
Did you are you taking questions?
Yeah, sure.
The last thing you just said, you said that Shem Adonai is Bechinas Malchus traveling. You said through Malchus. I think you meant traveling through Zah. Yes or no?
I said two different ways. I explained this last line can be explained two ways. Either Havaya is Zah and Adonai is Malchus. So Havaya is shining, but it's only going and it's passing through, not passing through, and it's coming to Malchus, basically the full intensity, but it's coming to Malchus. Or Havaya is Keser, like Tiferes Imma, and Adonai, it's in full intensity, but it's passing to Malchus, the Derech Maiver through Zah, through Adonai. That's the two ways I just suggested. I'm not positive which way it is. I lean one way more than the other because it's consistent, but I'm not sure. I have to read it a few more times. That's what I just said.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop here. We're gonna go over it again because I had to figure it out. We'll stop here. Close to the bottom of page 13.